we had collinearity in our goals, in our money goals, and our mission goals. Collinearity. And basically what that meant, because I needed to look it up, was that most of the decisions we had to make that were good for our mission were also good for our bottom line.
My name is Buddy Teaster, President and CEO of Souls for Souls, and host of the Repurpose podcast. Each episode offers candid conversations with business leaders and entrepreneurs who share the ups and downs, wins and challenges they faced along the way, and how they learned to overcome them. These are real stories of real people going from tailspin to tailwind, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. All right, welcome, Bill Strathman. Really pleased to have you on the Repurpose podcast.
Very excited to be here, buddy.
So, Bill, we've known each other for a long time, and what I'm finding out as I do more of these interviews is even when I think I know someone, there's a lot I don't know. So maybe you could just start a little bit with your background and kind of where that's led you to right now.
Okay, sure. So I was born on third base, but I was aware I did not hit a triple. My parents did the hitting the triple. They came from modest means, and we settled in the suburb of D.C. In the early 70s. I was kind of a average kid in pretty much every way in the suburbs. I was kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, kind of average athlete, drama kid, involved in student government. I did have one challenge growing up, and that was when I was 2.5, I stopped growing. And my mom realized this when the other moms were complaining about not being able to keep their kids in shoes. And after many visits to many pediatricians who said, well, he's not going to be a basketball player, but he'd make a great pediatrician because they were all short guys. I was diagnosed with a pretty bad growth hormone deficiency. My pituitary wasn't producing enough growth hormone. They didn't think they thought I'd be under 5 feet tall without an intervention.
Wow.
Yeah, so I ended up at Children's Hospital in D.C., and they diagnosed this, and they put me in this experimental program where I took human growth hormone injections from when I was 6 years old till I was 18 every other night, so about 2,000 injections.
Wow.
So that was the first kind of setback that I had. But other than that, pretty general background. Then philosophy major in a liberal arts college, tree hugger, kind of playing hacky sack on the quad. No idea what I wanted to do in my life. I fell into a startup after college, and that kind of got me the business bug, but I was interested in business as a force for good even back then, kind of worshipped at the altar of like Anita Roddick from The Body Shop and Ben & Jerry's. And so I thought, well, I'll go to business school to start a green company. And so I went to business school.
That is incredibly idealistic of you at that point.
Yeah, this was in the early 90s. But so I went to business school, started a green company, and then I ended up selling out and taking a job with the once large firm Arthur Andersen as a management consultant, chasing the partner track. Yeah. Thought it seemed like a great idea at the time. Many of my other buddies were joining. The internet was just booming at the time, and AOL was sending out floppy disks, if people know what those are, in the mail. And so my friends from business school, my classmates, were getting jobs at companies like AOL, and I thought, what are you going to do joining this fly-by-night company AOL? I'm going to go to this established firm, Arthur Andersen. I've got it made. And as folks may know, Arthur Andersen went out of business in 2002. I was still there at the time.
In a flaming, terrible way to go out.
Yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, it turns out, not a lot of people know this. So it was part of the Enron scandal. We were their accountants, and the Department of Justice indicted Arthur Andersen for obstruction of justice when they shredded some documents. A partner down in Texas shredded some documents around the Enron client. And ultimately, after the indictment, the firm went under. 80,000 people, kind of lost their jobs overnight around the world. And in an appeal, the decision was overturned. But it was too
Really?
late.
It was already done. It
was already done. It was already done. Everybody moved on. I was fortunate. My group, the consulting group, was acquired by Bearing Point, which is KPMG Consulting. But that was actually another fundamental piece of kind of my redirection, which I can talk more about if it's of interest.
Well, maybe just stop you there for a second, Bill.
Yeah.
Knowing that you went to school to start a green business and kind of who your heroes in the business world were, what was the decision to go to Arthur Andersen? That seems, I won't know about the antithesis, but it's a pretty different turn.
Yeah. So I was married. We were expecting to start a family. And I actually, kind of, when my mother was influential in this decision, she, again, I mentioned came from kind of a blue-collar Italian family in Hartford, Connecticut. And so once I had gone to business school and I had the option I had a business plan for this green company, to start a green company, or go to Arthur Andersen, which was had and I think deserved a very good reputation despite how it went under.
Yeah.
Because they really invested in their people. My mom was kind of said, listen, you can always, start a green company, but you can't always get an offer from Arthur Andersen. And it was one of those pieces where, kind of I was first faced with this kind of mission versus money decision, which has been something that I'm very passionate about and have learned a lot about through the years. And so, I kind of sold out in retrospect. But so that was a decision. I will say, though, my fourth day with Arthur Andersen was the biggest wake-up call I've ever had in my life on this decision, because my mom was diagnosed with cancer on my fourth day with Arthur Andersen.
Wow.
And she died 7 months later at the age of 54. And then my wife's mom died 3 years later from cancer as well at the age of 57. And so it really was a kick in the ass for the guy who thought he was going to, be changing the world rather than chasing the, fat partner track at Arthur Andersen.
So it's a big leap to the part that I know you for around Network for Good and, being super immersed in the not-for-profit world and helping organizations be. What was that decision? So when you got to the end of your Bearing Point time, what took you that direction?
Well, it was actually, in retrospect, it always sounds good when you paint the narrative afterwards.
It's only a story when you look back, right?
Yeah. And never let truth get in the way of a good story is the other piece to that. But it was a big wake-up call when my mom died.
Yeah.
I didn't change jobs immediately. I stayed at Andersen from 95 to 2002, so 7 years, and then a little time at Bearing Point. But that did motivate me to start to get more involved with nonprofits. So while still at Andersen, I started a nonprofit practice within Andersen, consulting to the big nonprofits. Yeah, so Nature Conservancy, National Association of Home Builders, American Farmland Trust, number of organizations, National Geographic, and I started to join small local nonprofit boards like the Anacostia Watershed Society here in D.C. I started to run marathons and do triathlons. You're a infamous ultra runner. I've only done one ultra. I can't hold a candle to you. But I started doing marathons and triathlons to raise money for causes. And then the other, kind of nudge I got, I guess I'd say, was when Arthur Andersen went under, it was a partnership. And so you could really make a lot of money, like at a law firm kind of money, Bearing Point was a public company, so there wasn't that financial upside, admittedly. So that was also another nudge to kind of think about, okay, what am I doing in my life if I'm only going to be on the planet till I'm 55, around that age. I'm 58 now. As I say, Shawshank Redemption, better get busy living or get busy dying. So that's kind of what built up to it. Then it was the Chicago Marathon, and early 2000s, I think 2000, 2001, I think I ran it. And for the first time, there was a way to raise money online for American Cancer Society. So you couldn't choose your own charity, but you could raise money for American Cancer Society. I had lost 2 loved ones.
I was going to say, that still
cancer.
lined up pretty well for you.
Lined up pretty well for
Yeah.
me. And so I went, and it was so much easier. I'd been fundraising, doing these races with paper pledge forms, right? Like walking around to neighbors' doors and stuff. I mean, it was literally like selling Girl Scout cookies, like the old school way. And it was so much easier online. And so I thought, and that's when I kind of had the moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, if I could just, send an invite or an evite, right, to a friend for a group of friends for a dinner party and say, hey, instead of bringing a bottle of wine, donate here to my favorite charity, the Anacostia Watershed Society. And wouldn't that be cool? So that's when I started to look into starting my own company and stumbled upon Network for Good.
So, Bill, the way that I've known you for probably close to 20 years now, 15 for sure, has been around at this intersection of social enterprise, of for-profit and not-for-profit. And if you're a not-for-profit, how to think more like a business. And if you're a for-profit business, how to think more like a not-for-profit. Right? You've always been at the face of that.
Yep.
So how did those two parts of you come together in Network for Good? Like, you've had this incredible experience at Arthur Andersen and Bearing Point. Like you said, those are high-quality people organizations. And now you have this idea and a passion, and it connects you to something that you wanted to do anyway. How did you begin that journey, and then talk about the arc to where it ended? Because I think how you brought that all together in Network for Good, turning it into a B Corp, is an incredible story.
Thanks. Well, so as I mentioned, I had wanted to start my own for-profit to do this kind of, raise money for any cause you care about. And it turned out Network for Good had been started 2 years before that. Steve Case at AOL had the idea
Who
before I did.
resurfaces after their floppy disk.
Yeah, exactly. The floppy disk guy coming back into my life. So AOL, Yahoo, and Cisco in 2001 started Network for Good with a $10 million grant.
Wow.
And the idea was twofold. One, create a place where people can give to any charity they want, any 501c3 in good standing with the IRS. And two, on the flip side of that, give, especially small nonprofits, a donation page for the website that's free, and that lets them get on the e-commerce train that they had not yet gotten on at all. But they did it as a nonprofit. And when I got there, they had built a really cool system, but they had run out of funding, and AOL, Yahoo, and Cisco weren't quite sure they wanted to continue funding at that level. They needed someone who could turn it around and raise money. It was about a $2 million operating budget, 7 people, distributing about $16 million a year to charities.
Wow. Still, that's a lot.
Still substantial.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what happened was I took the job. I took the job in February 2004. We weren't going to make payroll in June. So, you know where I live. You've kind of been there, and in a similar way. We were successful in raising the money to keep the lights on. We built a business model. We hadn't been charging any fees for anything because we were afraid that people wouldn't give using the internet if there was any fee associated. They just continued writing checks, which was totally inefficient, right? So we started charging a very small transaction fee, like 15 basis points on top of credit card fees. But more importantly, we started charging a subscription fee for the software we're providing, the donation page, and then more and more software over time. So, and we raised another $10 million from philanthropists who believed in this mission.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So basically, from 2004 to 2012, we raised another $10 million to fill the gap on between our earned revenue and the total revenue and our expenses, total revenue we needed. And we built this business model, and by 2012, we got to the point where we were self-sufficient on earned revenue alone.
Wow.
Now, that was great.
That cuts both ways. I'm guessing there's a but in there, yeah?
Yeah, victims of your own success. When I go back into, I raise money from foundations, corporations, and high net worth individuals. I go back into a high net worth individual's office. I'm like, hey, I want to grow this and scale it, because we didn't have any sales or marketing, so we were break even, but we weren't growing very fast, and we wanted to unleash generosity on a massive scale, right? So they're asking for money for a nonprofit that's covering his expenses with earned revenue, and is in truth not on the front lines. We're helping the helpers,
Right.
And they're like, Bill, listen, there's a guy, eradicating malaria in the waiting room. He wants $1 million. He's on the front lines. He has no revenue. So he's going to get it, not you.
Yeah.
And that was actually one of the obstacles that made us spin it out into a for-profit B Corp, as you mentioned.
So that was the reason. It was a funding
It was growth
crisis,
capital.
a growth capital. Okay.
Well, yeah. So we wanted to. So I went to the board. I said, we want to scale this, right? We want to unleash generosity on a massive scale. We need sales, marketing. That was number one. Number two, and so we didn't have growth capital. If you can't get it from grants, you're not going to get $10 million in debt, because we wanted another $10 million. We don't have enough excess revenue, and there's no equity in a nonprofit. You can't own a nonprofit. So, and it was hard to attract talent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially sales and marketing and technology talent.
Yeah.
Once they got in the door in our recruiting process, they realized we were, we meant business. But they just didn't even look at the .org want ads.
Yeah,
you
right.
know? And so it was mostly the growth capital and the talent. And so we said, well, what if we created a for-profit subsidiary that's wholly owned by the nonprofit, and we just basically take what we're doing, and the nonprofit goes from being an owner-operator to just being an owner, like a holding company, for the most part. It's a little more nuanced than that. But then, and then the for-profit can, number one, carve out some options, an option pool to attract talent.
Right.
But also importantly, raise capital, investment capital from an investor.
Bill, when you're making that pitch, I mean, you've been at it for 8 years at that point. You're self-sufficient.
Right.
But going to a group of, I'll say, venture-minded investors and saying, we're going to serve this very fragmented, don't know if they're going to make payroll market, and I need $10 million to grow. Like, what did you have to shift in their minds or in your model to get that conversation going?
It was not only that, that like, wait, is this a really good market? So you're going to serve under-resourced small nonprofits? It was also, and my co-owners are going to be a board of nonprofit board members,
right,
who frankly have no interest in an exit.
Yeah.
They just want to drive more donations to charity. So their goals are mission-based, and my goals are financial return, exit-based.
Right.
That was also the challenge. The first one that you mentioned was a little bit easier because there were a lot of new entrants in the space that are realizing that not only were the big nonprofits a great market, like take Blackbaud, which is a large public company that people might know, but there were smaller companies that were getting bought up by Blackbaud that were going after the lower end of the market with tools software that was more appropriate and affordable and usable by that market.
Mm-hmm.
So there was some evidence that this market had a lot of potential. And, there's 1 million small nonprofits.
Yeah.
So it was large.
Literally.
So if you, right, yeah, more than 1 million, actually. But and so if you get beyond the belief that, they'll actually buy the software, and we had some traction there, right?
Sure.
We were very well known in the nonprofit space. We had really good brand recognition because we not only provided software, but taught nonprofits how to raise money in a digital world. So that was actually not as hard as the other piece.
Interesting. Yeah.
Is like looking at, because initially we wanted to raise money from impact investors.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, there just wasn't that much money in impact investing. And we were in this little we were in kind of a quadrant of, as I mentioned, helping the helpers.
Yeah. Not as sexy.
Not as sexy. So we ultimately ended up raising money, and my board was really smart about this because I pitched them. The board was on board, right, with the spin-out concept, right, because they really wanted to grow and not just kind of sit there at break even. And but they said, before we go through this whole process of spinning it out, go prove that there's someone who wants to invest. So I went and got 3 term sheets from hardcore investors who believed. We walked from 2 of those, 1 walked from us, and then ultimately spun it out after that to scale the model. And actually we spun it out without having secured a big round. We just got a convertible note from some smaller investors,
right,
who were in fact impact focused.
So, but what did it look after that? So you've made the pitch, you've got past the governance piece, you've got the people believe the model. It goes from where to where over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And I know there was a lot of acquisition. You sort of maybe looked at the black bond model and said that's part of how we'll grow.
Yep.
But you've always got this mission at the back. Can you just talk
Right.
about how you constantly had to keep those 2 things in tension?
Yeah. So first, just to kind of beginning and end, when we spun it out, we were probably we measure our mission based on how many dollars we were sending to nonprofits through our system, because we were helping them raise it through a variety of fundraising software. Like it wasn't just a donation page for their website; it was email marketing, it was a donor management system. Right. We grew it out over time. But so when we spun it out, we were probably distributing about $30 million a year. About. We had distributed to that point not quite $1 billion, because it had been around for a dozen years or so.
Right.
From the time then the 8 years from when we spun it out to when we ultimately exited, spoiler alert, we distributed another $4 billion.
Oh my God.
So it worked. It worked in that we distributed the money at a much faster rate and much higher volume. So $4 billion over 8 years versus about $1 billion, less than $1 billion over 12, just to kind of put it in round numbers. So that part worked, but it was a constant balance from kind of beginning to end. And I'd say that one of the most important moments was that at spin out how we did it, because we wanted to make sure that we were balancing the money and the mission. In other words, we didn't want to give up our mission. You want to have mission insurance, people call it, or mission lock or mission anchor, but we also didn't want to scare away the money, because we knew we were going to have to be selling to someone who would ultimately want to sell the company, or investing in that would ultimately want to sell the company. And just knowing that I knew who I was working with on the other side of the of the table was fundamental. So throughout, kind of those helped us in our guidelines. But we had one of the things, Buddy, I think the real thing that made it easier for us than most, and I think Souls for Souls has this as well, and I didn't come up with this term, an investor introduced it to me, is an mission investor, an impact investor, we had collinearity in our goals, in our money goals and our mission goals, collinearity. And basically what that meant, because I needed to look it up, was that most of the decisions we had to make that were good for our mission were also good for our bottom line.
Right.
So that really helped a lot.
Bill, can you think of some examples where there was tension between those two, where there wasn't collinearity, and how did you resolve them, either through the board or through some of your other Bs? How did that help when there was a conflict or a potential conflict?
Yeah, it's funny. I remember John Mackey from Whole Food, founder of Whole Foods, had a quote saying, like, when people talk about double bottom lines and that not being able to come with a conflict, it's a failure of imagination and creativity. You should always be able to overcome those things. Well, I mean, an obvious one would be pricing for nonprofits. So, if you want to, from a mission standpoint, serve as many nonprofits as possible, then you give it away. Right. So that was one. But, we were already a social enterprise before we spun out.
Yeah. You'd already kind of crossed that bridge.
A lot of this stuff was kind of baked in. And, I've always felt that, like, if you have a way, so the social problem we were trying to address was more money for charities and nonprofits, right? How do we drive more dollars to nonprofits? And most social problems that charities take on are more challenging than that, right? And there aren't business models available to them to attack those problems. We were lucky in that we had a business model available to us, a market-based model, to attack that problem. And so one of the things we constantly remind ourselves is that you kind of have a moral imperative to run a business. I mean, this might sound like a cop-out, but I feel it's true that if you can solve a social problem with a business model that has a market-based solution, you should, and then reserve the charitable dollars, philanthropic dollars, for those social problems that don't have a business model to solve them. So that was part of it as well in terms of addressing them. I'm trying to think of other examples. We were kind of lucky because, well, it wasn't all luck, but there were some smarts. But we had members of our nonprofit board who were hardcore business guys.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't just I'll put in quotes, the do-good crowd. There were hardcore business people on that side, too.
It wasn't just the do-good crowd. In fact, when I requested that, because I mentioned overcoming this skepticism from the investor of like, who are these other people on the other side of the table that are going to be owning this company with me? I actually arranged a dinner in New York because I had the two board members that I wanted to put on the board of the for-profit from the nonprofit were both founders of unicorns, that started. And so
that's pretty good to have in your pocket.
So that was pretty good to have. And so they were, at one point I had my board on the for-profit. I had 3 folks who had been, part of founding teams of companies that went to, $1 billion in market value. But that was helpful as well.
Let me ask you a question. We both know Angela Harrell, who's been on the podcast and is the chair of the board of Souls for Souls. I asked her recently, she's more involved with her Voya public board. And I said, what have you learned from that experience that you bring into Souls for Souls? And she said, let me stop you right there. I'm learning stuff at Souls for Souls that I'm taking into Voya in that board setting, which it's both surprising and encouraging. So what about for you? Because you were at the interface of those two things in a way that not everybody else was.
Right.
And a lot of what you've talked about is the business discipline that brought to serving the not-for-profit market. What kind of things were you able to bring? Like, did you see some of your hardcore, I'm here for the exit in 7 years crowd come around to the mission and consider that as important as the financial performance?
So, first of all, one of the pieces I always say to young leaders and CEOs of for-profit companies is one of the first things you should do is join a nonprofit board. That is the most educational process for a CEO because you see what you look like on the other side of a board. Right? I mean, I remember being at not your board meeting, not when I was on your board, but early on, and the CEO throughout the board meeting did most of the talking, and didn't give the board that much time to provide input. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I do. I got to switch that. And so I think it really just is incredibly helpful to stand on the other side. In terms of embracing the mission, I think that at a minimum, I would always say to the investors, because we raised more than one round, I'd say, listen, we're not only going to provide financial return, but we're going to be the company that you like to talk to your spouse about at cocktail parties, because of all the good we're doing. And so I do think that it opened their eyes to, they're already philanthropic.
Sure.
They're already philanthropic. But what it opened their eyes to was social enterprise. Mm-hmm. And the fact that, and you and I have talked about this, I think when we met, I was chairman of the Social Enterprise Alliance.
Yeah, exactly.
I talked about this for a long time, but is that we tend to have in our society, still today, this concept of like, you've got $1, and what we really do essentially is we have this binary approach where we tear the dollar in half, and we take half of it, or more than half of it, and invest it or save it to make money, and then we take the other half to do good.
Yeah.
Right? And that's such an old way of thinking about things, right? Today, there's so many opportunities. It's a spectrum. It's not a binary decision, right?
Yeah.
There's so many opportunities in between where you can sometimes do both, like in the case of Never for Good. Our impact was maybe a small, I, not, capital I, because we were helping the helpers. But nevertheless, there are opportunities more and more where you can do both or sacrifice a little money to do a little good. And so I think that was more of what folks were awakened to who had been more traditional private equity. But we still have a long way to go, though, in my estimation.
Well, I'll ask you a question about that. I had a conversation recently, and this person said something I don't agree with, but it was an interesting perspective, and that is we don't need not-for-profits like we used to. There are a little bit to your point, the spectrum now is so wide, is so more sophisticated than it was even 10 years ago. So I don't agree with that. But if I know you teach some, you're involved with mentoring, and so a young-ish person comes to you and says, I want to start a not-for-profit. Given that you have deep roots in both sides of the equation now, how do you help somebody think about why are you doing it? What's the purpose? How do you get it done?
Well, first I ask them if they are sure they want to start a nonprofit, because people think a lot of times that that's easier because you don't have to be profitable. But nonprofit's just a tax status. It's you got to have revenue.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's harder. So first of all, let me say I agree with you that it's not true that we need fewer nonprofits. Well, let me say this, because they're businesses that are attacking social problems. I don't agree that that's true.
Yeah.
I agree that we need more businesses attacking social problems, and maybe the nonprofit market's a little too fragmented because there are no incentives to do mergers and roll-ups in the nonprofit sector. That's a whole nother conversation. But I would agree that there may be too many nonprofits. But not that there's a shift because there are for-profits that are filling a gap. I disagree with that.
Right.
But back to your question, one of the things is what are the personal values, that the person has. Starting because for every individual, there's the question, like when I sold out, after business school, there's a question of mission or money, right? It's like, how much are you willing to sacrifice? Like where, financially. So that's one question I'll ask them. And then I'll ask them kind of why they want to start a nonprofit. As opposed to a for-profit, right? Because getting back to what I said earlier is I really believe like if you can figure out a way to have earned revenue while you solve that social problem, it sure, as you know, it sure does help.
Yeah.
And obviously the dollars you still have to raise, like if you don't have a model that covers 100% of your expenses, like, Souls for Souls, like Net for Good for many years, those donated dollars go a lot farther.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that, Bill? I think that's one thing that you shared with me about what you liked about Souls for Souls and some other organizations is about the leverage on that and how to think about it as a donor. If you're on the board or like I do, I work in one and that's where I earn my living.
Yeah. But
leverage is so often, it's not the way people see it, right? They're like, oh, I'm just writing a check or donating shoes. And you have I thought, a pretty sophisticated way that helped us think about leverage on a donated dollar in an earned revenue model.
Yeah, I don't know if it resonates with other people, but it always has with me. And that is, so, let's say you have a traditional charity that has no business model or no earned revenue. And they have an impact, and, people call it social ROI, like whatever good they're doing. Let's say they have, by their measurement, a 10x return on that impact. Well, so every dollar you give them has a 10x return. Well, now, let's say that they have 50%, right? And so if they have $1 million budget and they're doing 10 million of impact, right? They raise $1 million, 10x return, $10 million of impact. Okay, if I have an earned revenue strategy where I'm earning through business, whether it's, some just buy Ben and Jerry's. That used to be the old trick, and have earned revenue. But if I have earned revenue, especially if it's affiliated with my mission, like Souls for Souls, then let's say I'm covering 50% of my expenses with earned revenue. Well, now I only have to raise $500,000 on that $1 million nonprofit, and I'm still having $10 million of impact. So to me, the math is now 1 to 20.
Right.
For every dollar is, $500. I've raised $500,000 by having $10 million of impact. So that's how I think of it in terms of the leverage piece. I'll say so that's why I'm super excited about social enterprise, for-profits that are using business as a force for good, like B Corps and the like, and nonprofits that have earned revenue strategy. I'm super jazzed about those for that leverage piece, but also for sparing the charitable dollars, right? Because we're not using them; we're using other fuel, and those charitable dollars are very hard to find and get, and there are lots of problems in the world that are very complicated that solve. But Souls for Souls has even more significant one, like an extra accelerator in my mind, because of all the donated product you get.
Yeah.
Or we get.
I like the we.
I'm still hanging in there. I'm not on the board. For folks who don't know, I'm board emeritus, not a voting board member anymore. But with all this donated product we get, that's another kind of leverage point we have in addition to the social enterprise model. So it's really fantastic what we're able to achieve at Souls for Souls.
But I'm going to ask you 2 more questions as we sort of round the corner here. I won't say round third since you opened with being born on third. It's a thing that you and I share a little bit. I was a religious studies and French major. Then I went back and got an MBA and an MA in arts administration, philosophy, and an MBA from UVA. Again, looking back, you can tell the story about how that worked out. But how did it work? Like, were there times when you felt like those 2 sides of your brain or your personality helped you navigate this in-between that you spent your whole career in, kind of?
Yeah, I definitely had a lot of back and forth between the kind of mission and money from, philosophy major days till, I guess when we finally spun out Network for Good, I was kind of all in on, hey, why sacrifice one for the other?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's a tough one, buddy. Like, I don't necessarily think of it as kind of 2 sides of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with a philosophy major, it was. I knew I wanted to do good and kind of change the world and dreamy-eyed, college days, but I had no idea how. And to be honest, I kind of studied philosophy because I thought, well, when am I going to get a chance to do this? And I would like to say I was very prescient in terms of it structuring my thinking for the rest of my life. But it kind of did. Like, I think for me, it was just chasing the passion at the time, and philosophy was an unexpectedly valuable tool. So I was a philosophy major, right? And this kind of gets back to my saying, like, I'm not sure they are 2 different minds. I'm gonna take a big swing here, see if this plays out. As a philosophy major, you're reading, Plato, Aristotle, all the guys, and there's a lot about what's the purpose of life, why are we here, and it comes down to doing good and serving others. I think the Latin is non sibi sed aliis, not self but others. There's my 6 years of Latin coming in handy. And so then take that in its application to business, and I'll say even larger, capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I told you I was going to take a big swing here. I like to quote Churchill when he said, democracy is the worst system on the planet, except for all the others that have been tried and failed. And so that's kind of how I feel about capitalism, is I think it's a great system. It's just missing a little bit. And for me, I used to call it social capitalism, as I thought was a better goal that we should have. One of my professors at UVA calls it, Ed Freeman calls it stakeholder capitalism, which I think is a better name because social can have, for whatever reasons, with some folks, a negative connotation. I guess socialism maybe. But stakeholder capitalism is really, a better description because it shouldn't be just about earning shareholder dollars, right? It should be obviously broader than that. And there's so much money going into corporations compared to, organizations that exist to solve social problems like government and nonprofits, charities, that unless we kind of at least slightly redirect the corporate dollars to having a broader set of stakeholders than just the financial shareholders. So for me, I think that was kind of helpful in steering my belief, in retrospect. It always sounds better in the rearview mirror. But in retrospect, that helped me kind of drive, like, okay, I'm super excited. I really believe in business as, a great way to get stuff done. But is the goal exactly right? And so, I think that's probably helped drive it a little bit. I can't say for sure. But so I think it was helpful and not necessarily two different, parts of my brain.
That's fair. I also just want to make sure we get a plug in a little bit for the liberal arts education. still having relevance.
Oh, I 100% believe in that. I mean, I believe in that just in education for education's sake, to get a broad. I mean, I've always avoided specialization my entire life. I mean, I've had to, now kind of specialize, but I've always tried to be jack of all trades, master of none.
Well, that's going to tie in perfectly to my last question that we ask all of our guests, Bill. So you've exited network for good. You said you're 58. You still got a lot of life ahead of you. But when you think about 20 years from now, so not what do you want to be doing in 20 years, but 20 years from now, what do you want to look back and remember about your life at this moment? All that you've learned and experienced, what do you want to recall about Bill Strathman in 2025 when you're almost 80 years old?
It's not as much about Bill Strathman that I want to remember. And, I've watched and listened to, I've listened to the other podcasts, so I knew you were going to ask this question. I know some things I don't want to remember right now in our times. I hope the division in our country is a distant memory, and I hope that the obsession with social media and mobile phones is a distant memory. I hope. But for me, so that's kind of on the macros. And for me, it's more micro stuff, and I think a lot about this. And for me, I'm kind of at the age now where I'm in this stage where I have 3 kids. They're adulting.
Ish.
They're ish. They'll in the fall they'll be 28, 26, and 22. I guess the one who's already 26. And so I'm shifting out of kind of parent mode. And I've mentioned, my wife and I have unfortunately lost all of our parents, but a lot of our friends are dealing with that stage now. And so you're seeing more loved ones, losing loved ones. And so for me, what I'd like to remember 20 years from now are kind of in those 2 buckets. Like one is for family and friends is and this might sound corny, but it's like the little laughter moments of joy. I hope I remember those 20 years from now. An example is, when we were just together in Honduras for the Souls for Souls board meeting. My wife is half Honduran, and I know you know this because everybody was interested in this at the board meeting. But after the board meeting, she met for the first time her brother and sister, her half-brother and sister in Honduras.
Incredible.
And that moment, was just so special. And there's some smaller moments even that are just insignificant that I hope I remember. And then the other piece I hope I remember more on the losing loved ones is, my mom's been gone now for, almost 30 years. And sadly, when you and I grew up, we didn't have videos from every day of our life and photos. And so I don't have that much. And so I hope I to remember by it. And so I hope that I can remember the idiosyncrasies and mannerisms and little stories of the loved ones that I will have lost between now and 20 years from now.
Got real there at the end, Bill Strathman.
Sorry.
No, that's really beautiful to think about the small moments. I mean,
The small
Katita
moments.
meeting
There's
half her
some
family
movies-
that's not a small moment. But those things about what did we laugh about? What were the silly inside jokes
Yeah, exactly.
that you can sort of anchor back to?
And they just make you
Just
laugh
make-
when
right,
you remember
exactly,
them. You know,
right.
There's some movie, I can't remember what it was, but every time something like that happened, the character in the movie would use his fingers as if it were like a little camera and go and try and make a mental memory of it. You know, if I could do that, that'd be perfect.
yeah.
You know, just take a little mental snapshot of that moment and remember it 20 years from now.
Well, Bill, that is a perfect way to end. Thanks for this conversation. There were all the acquisitions that you did. I know it was not always up and to the right, even after you spun it out.
Oh gosh. And again, it always sounds better in the rearview mirror, and with when you weave the narrative.
Yeah,
to
the voiceover is always better than the rough draft.
Exactly.
of the script. So, look, thanks for sharing that experience and your time, and for all that you've done for Souls, and really for how you've helped change people's thinking about not-for-profit and for-profit, and how those two things can live together in a way that's far more productive than this binary look that you said when you tear the dollar in half. And that, I think, is a message that's not going to go out of style anytime soon. So thanks for sharing that.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate all you do for the world too, buddy. Souls for Souls is an amazing organization, and you're an amazing leader. And I really appreciate all the impact that you guys are having, and I guess that we're having.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for joining us on the Repurpose Podcast with me, Buddy Teaster. You can follow the show at buddyteaster.com/podcast, and you can learn more about what we do at s4s.org. If you like this content, please share, rate, and review our episodes wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And until next time, I ask you to ask yourself, what's your why? And how will discovering that help give your life a repurpose?